Are you ready to unlock the power of Unreal Engine and don't know where to start? Well, in this tutorial, we're going to go through all the essentials for people like you, for beginners alike and people that have just started out and just dabbled in Unreal Engine and really want to get into grips and be able to build their own projects. So stick with me and you'll learn all you need to know to use Unreal Engine. In this first part, we'll cover how to set up your own Unreal Engine installation, how to start up a new project, how to bring in content in it, how to play around with lighting and build your very first scene. Basic scene, but going full on fundamentals. Whether you're looking to create stunning environments or build your own game, this is very good for fundamentals and also for future endeavors for you. You really need a solid foundation, and I believe this video will provide that to you. So let's begin. Okay guys, so straight off the bat, when you want to actually start running Unreal Engine, you do need to install it through the Epic Games launcher. So you'll need to get Epic Games, you need to install, make an account and install the Epic Game Launcher. And then with that, you will have this option here where it says Unreal Engine, and you go over to your library, and in here, you won't be able to see any of this stuff. You won't have any of these engines or anything like that. So I have quite a few versions of this installed. But if you press the Engine version plus button here, it will add a 5.0.3 version. Now you can select from this drop-down menu whatever other version you want to add. So for us, for our intended purposes, really, all we would really need to add is the 5.4.4 because that's the one that we're actually going to use. You can install 5.3, 5.2, 5. It doesn't really matter because what I'm going to show you basically applies to all of them anyway. Now it doesn't allow me to select any of those because I already have them installed, so I don't need to do that. So I can just press this X button. Now, very important here is that most people do install these engines to predominantly use them on Windows. So this is important because a lot of people don't actually know that whenever they install a new engine, they actually have a few choices to make in order to mitigate how much space is being taken. So if we actually press this over here and we do choose, we choose install, this is going to give us some options like where we want to install them and so on. Now, when you press the options button in here, it will ask you what type of content you want to add. Now, by default, you will have a lot of these things in here ticked off, like Android, iOS, and Linux. And as you can see, these are taking quite a lot of space. So right now, it's going to take us about 58.96 gigabytes. But if you deselect these options, for example, because let's say you're maybe only developing for Windows, then you only really need a 37 gigabytes. Now, if you are somebody who develops on Android, then you will definitely want to add the Android, for example. Now, you cannot remove the Windows files if you're on Windows, right? So obviously that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, you do have some starter content, templates and feature packs and engine source that you can add. And also it says here editor symbols for debugging. You don't actually want any of that. You just want the engine source, the templates and feature packs and the starter content because those are going to give you a lot of templates that you can start off straight away with. Now, as I said, I'm not going to install, but I'm not going to accept and apply and install this engine. But just so you know, that's what I would definitely suggest for you to be able to mitigate the space cost. Now, let's just press the X over here, like I've said. And now we have Unreal Engine 5.4.4. So if we press launch on this, this will allow you to effectively start creating a project. For most people, this is the category of games is going to be the one that they mostly want. Now in here, you already will have quite a few templates because you've enabled them when you've installed the engine. That's obviously if you did that. Now, you're going to be able to choose for a blank scene or first person, third person, top down if you're making a strategy, AR, virtual reality, vehicles. For example, you'll have a car in it. There's also a few other categories like, film, video, and live events, where generally I like to start with a blank scene because it basically has nothing in it. I can start from scratch on pretty much everything. But there are other options in here as well, where you've got architecture or simulation or things like that. So every one of these project types, when you click on them, it will give you a few explanations as to what's going on and what they're set up to do effectively. Like, for example, this one is a very good one to have a mesh that you can put on in a photo studio, so you can do very nice screenshot renders of it. Now, for our intended purposes, we're actually going to be using this blank point over here. Now, I am going to put my project in the downloads folder, and I am going to call this tutorial beginner, something like that, or beginner, maybe. I think that's how you type beginner. Right. So once I've done that, I also have some options in here if I want a project that's made with Blueprints or C++. Now, because you are a beginner, we are going to use Blueprints, which is a lot more straightforward and a lot easier to understand. Also in here, you can choose if it's a desktop or mobile sort of platform that you're going for. And I believe if you switch to mobile, it will ask you to install some things that you may have not already installed. And then the maximum sort of preset, we're going to keep that to maximum. We're going to say, yes, add start the content. And then ray tracing, if you have hardware capable of doing that, enable it. If not, just leave it as it is. Then once you press create, Unreal Engine will now pretty much load up the project. As you can see, we'll just take a bit of time, compile some shaders and so on. So no need to worry. If this takes longer for you, then just wait. It really depends on how many shaders it needs to compile for this empty project. And it really depends on what kind of project template you're starting with. Some of them are pretty much instant and others will take a bit of time. And especially if you enable ray tracing, this will take a bit more as well. Now, we are in a basic sort of engine. Now, you're not seeing everything properly. Don't be afraid. All of these errors here, or all these things that you're seeing on the screen, they will disappear once the system has completely managed to clear all the shaders that it's trying to create. But you are now in the viewport, so this entire area here is what we call the viewport, your working area. Now, the working area is quite easy for you to sort of navigate, especially if you are a video gamer. So if you actually press WSD without pressing the mouse in any particular way, nothing will happen. But if you hold the right click button, you will notice that you are now able to rotate the camera around and look in the world, pan the camera around. And if you press WSD while holding that mouse cursor, you'll see that I'm actually moving into the world from left to right, forward, backward, and I can even fly upwards or downwards. And what's interesting, while you keep the right click pressed, you can press Q to go down and E to go up in the world as well. This is quite nice because let's say you are doing a cinematic, you can actually animate your camera based on those movements. If you hold the left click, you have the functionality of the right click in a way, but all you're really doing is you're turning your camera on a pivot from left to right, and that's about it. Now, this doesn't mean that WSD won't work anymore because it still will work. Okay, so that's basically that's the basic controls of Unreal Engine in the viewport. Now, there are obviously more shortcuts and more things that you can do. Like, for example, I find it very useful for people to know straight off the bat how to play around with the camera speed. So let's say I want to get over to that, hill over there very, very fast. Moving right now, it's going to take a while, okay? If I use the scroll wheel to push forward, I'm going to move faster, and you'll notice that that number on the camera has gone up while I rotate. You can see it right now. I'm rotating while I'm holding my right click, I'm rotating and the number is going up or down, which means that I can move faster or slower depending on what that number is. And I can also even like put the camera speed scalar, put it quite high up. So for example, if I take it around here, now you'll notice that I'm moving with the speed of light. This is like we've gone out of the game world. That's how fast this is moving. But let's say this has happened to you and you don't know what to do because you're now outside the game world. You're pretty much seeing things from space. So what can you do? Well, over onto the right side here, you have what they call the outliner, which is a library of all the assets that you have within this level right now. So for us to be able to get back to where we were, we can actually select the landscape, which is the main mesh that we were seeing, the part that we could walk on effectively. And with it selected, I can press F on the keyboard, which will now take me pretty much underneath the landscape. So I want to get above. So first thing, I'm going to like reduce this camera speed back to 1, and I'm going to hold right click and E to get back up here to be able to see the world again. And this is quite nice. I am able to see it, and I'm back to where I was. Now, there's something else about the viewport as well. If you scroll without holding the right click or left click, you'll see they were actually a bit of zooming in and out. This is very subtle and not very useful, to be honest. But you can do that as well if you'd like. Now, with the back to the outliner, we can see folders. And we can see all sorts of elements within these folders. We can also hide folders. We can, like for example, we could hide the directional light, which means that the whole light of the system just kind of goes away. Think of the directional light as a sort of a system that controls the entire sun, the world. The sun, the directional light is the sun, effectively in Unreal Engine. Now, the outliner is also able to have elements that are attached to each other. So later on we'll go through that, but if we have multiple objects, we could move them all by having one parent object. So I'll show you how to do that later as well. Moving on from the outliner, underneath here we have a list of components for whatever we select. So for example, if we select this skylight, you'll notice it has two components, which is the skylight parent and what's inside the skylight. Now, both of these, when you press them, they will show you the same options down here, because the parent is the one that controls the child, which is this part over here, which has, various different settings. So if, for example, we select the directional light, then with the parent selected, which is this, we can actually increase the intensity of directional light or decrease it. Maybe go to like a 2 or 3 or something like that. And there's a bunch more options down here that I will go through some of these later on when you will, basically we get there for you to understand. Right now, we're just doing the UI stuff, right? And basic navigation. Now, over in here where we've got also this world settings. Now, you might not be able to see this, but if you go up to window and you click on the world settings, then this panel will show up in here. Now, this is not very important to you right now as a beginner, but later on, this is where you can actually set up the game mode. So, for example, if you would like the world to be a place where you can like walk around, then where it says here game mode override, you can select what type of game mode. Now, because we didn't add any sort of package, we can't actually select anything substantial like a third-person character. But I will show you how to do that later, so you can actually walk through the environment as well. Now, going back to our details panel, we are, over here we have all the properties for whatever we select in the world. So if we select directional light, we can see everything about it. If we select the exponential height fog, which is this sort of like fog at the edge of, further away within the world, then it will control everything here. So for example, we could play around with this intensity, maybe something like that. So now you can see the height fog, how it's changed because we've moved around some settings. We can also override these numbers by putting in numbers directly, like a 1 or a 2 or a 0.5. And as you can see, 0.5 is very strong. Even 0.2 is very strong. 0.1 is something that allows us to still see the environment. Now, over here, you'll notice this sort of arrow thing. If you click it, it will reset to the default settings. So clicking that will put anything that you've changed to its default value that the engine comes with effectively. Okay, right. Now, let's move on a little bit to explain some other parts of this project. Now, if you remember, we did actually got our starter content when we installed the engine, which means that we will have a starter content in this project because we also ticked the box when we created the project. So if I now want my content drawer, which is down here, you can press it or use Control Spacebar, and this will bring you the content browser, which, by the way, you can actually dock it in a layout, as they say. So if you press that, it will generally just create a content browser like that. And if you select it from here, you can drop it wherever you want, maybe down here or up here or whatever you want, or you could just leave it floating about. But for now, we're just going to use this content drawer from here. Okay, so with it selected, we can have a look and see that there are a bunch of options in here. The first thing that you want to do as a beginner is to go into the folder, the starter content, and start playing around with some of the objects in there. Now, you're seeing here in my image a filter panel. Normally, you wouldn't see that, but because I've set up filters before, that's why it's showing up. If I select this button over here and deactivate the static mesh, you'll see that the filter is gone. But this is quite a useful tool because if you click it, you can now choose however the content browser is going to show you content. So for example, if I just want to see meshes that I've imported, I can just press the static mesh, and now with that enabled, I can only see the meshes within the content drawer. And if I press this over here, it will deactivate it. Over in here, we have things like add. So if you press the add button, it will ask you what you want to add. So you can add in the content browser a lot of these sort of elements in here, which are kind of going to fly past your head at the minute because there's a lot of stuff that you can do. So we're just going to go through the things that you need to know to begin with in order to use Unreal Engine. Now, you can also import things. So if you press this button, it will ask you, what do you want to import? So again, we're going to go through that later in a later lesson, but the idea being that you can import textures, music, meshes, and so on within the engine with this tool. Now, there's also a save all, which means saving all of your assets that you've changed within the world, effectively saving the project. And then you've got like navigation back and forth, and then the link just to see where you are in the content browser. Over here on the left side, I wouldn't really mess with this because it's basically a hierarchy tier, a tree that shows you everything within the folder structure that you have. Now we're going to enter the starter content, and over in here we are going to open the shapes. And then in here we have some shapes to play with. So for example, I'm going to drop this pyramid. So I've just put it down there on the ground, but it's like so far away from us. So if you remember, if you press F on the keyboard while having that object selected, which it is in the outliner, this will make us center over to it, right? And my camera is still moving very fast. So I am going to go up here and switch this over to 0.6. So now we can move around this pyramid quite nicely. Okay, so important for you to understand is that this pyramid has a pivot point in the center at the bottom here, in the center of the pyramid at the bottom. And we know this because when we select it, that's where the gizmo shows up. Now, this is a gizmo that's allowing us to move the pyramid around the world like that. And then this is like standard for any other engine that you've used, so or Blender or whatever, so that's the same thing. Now you are able to change things over here. So for example, this is an object select, so this only allows you to select objects, and that's about it. This is going to be the move. This is going to be a rotation, so now you can rotate the object. And this is going to be scale, so if you select this, you can actually scale the object on whatever sort of axis you'd like. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. It's quite easy. Okay, now some other interesting thing to do here is, like, for example, if you select the rotation and you want this to rotate in degrees of 10, which it is right now, you'll notice that this is happening because we have this snapping enabled. But if we disable it, then it will just smoothly rotate. So for more fine precision sort of movements, this is going to be useful if you deactivate it. And you'll see this grid is also enabled, which means that if we move the object, it will move in grids of 10. You can change that number, maybe in grids of 500, which means the object will move like that when you move it around. It won't move anymore in the grid of 10. So we can actually switch that back to 10 now, like that. If you deactivate it, then your object will smoothly move without following a grid. There's also this option in here where it says cycles the transform gizmo from a sort of like a local object coordinate to a world coordinate. So let's say we have rotated this object by 50 degrees, right? Right now, it's using the world coordinate, which means that this rotation will always stay parallel to the world. But if we select this button over here, you'll see that the gizmo has changed because it's now showing us the rotation of the actual object, the local coordinate. So we can actually put this back to minus 50, which will take it back to 0. And that's going to be, in our sort of like local space or world space is now aligned. We can press this button again, and now we're back to world space. Now, another thing in here is control how objects snap to surfaces. So you can have surface snapping enabled, which means that if you move the object around and you have multiple surfaces here, it will be able to kind of like, move across, snapping to each other. Now, you can actually duplicate this quite easily. If you right click, you can find in here an option to like duplicate it. I can't even remember now what it was, but basically, I think, yeah, edit and then duplicate. But you can see there the shortcut is Control D as well. But I also have another shortcut for you, which is holding the Alt key and then left clicking on the gizmo to move and just moving across. And now you can see we've created a copy of the pyramid by using that. And they, in theory, you can see there, this is what that snapping is doing, okay? This is what this option over here where it said object snap to surfaces, that's what that's doing. If I disable that, let's say I take it off, Now you'll notice it's no longer doing that. It's just moving around, okay? So it's quite nice to use that tool in order for you to build something very, very nicely. But with it disabled, you can just freely move the objects around. And guys, do remember that if you do support if you want to support the platform, you can do so on Patreon, where you get access to all of my projects that I have for sale. So just for one subscription, you basically get everything. And also you can go to my website, 3D Project Masters, or my Unreal Engine Marketplace, and purchase any of my projects if you'd like to support the channel. But let's get back to the tutorial. Now I've taken the liberty of creating a few boxes in here just so we can put them around into the world and just build up a room, basically. Now I want to show you something as well. On top of the fact that you can use the content browser from here to add different shapes, you can also go up here into this cube and press the plus button. And then over in here, you can actually add all sorts of things, like for example, going to shapes and adding basic shapes into the world. Now, one thing as well is if you press this button over here, you'll be able to actually put this over onto the left side if you know how to. So for me, generally, I like to go over here into the window and have a look over here, and it says things like place actors. So if you press this button, you'll notice a new panel has now showed up, and this panel is exactly what we opened over here. Now we can click the shape button, and you can see that we can, for example, drop a cylinder in here, and we can now use the new technique that we learned to move this cylinder about and place it somewhere in the world like that. Now also, if you hold shift while changing the direction or moving the object, you'll notice that the camera is now moving alongside with the object as well, so that you can sort of like keep all of it into the frame quite perfectly. So that's very neat. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this part here of this cube, which has been stretched out to be a rectangular shape. And I'm going to hold Alt and left click up just to effectively bring it up here. And I'm going to bring it, something like that, which is quite nice. Then I'm also going to drag it over into this side as well. And I'm going to make sure that it's like covering the end of these. And then I'm going to make another copy of it and bring it over here like that, maybe somewhere around in the middle. Now I'm going to switch over to scale, which is R on the keyboard, or select it from here. And then I'm going to scale on this axis until I've almost covered the roof. I've, created like a roof, and I'm going to place it like that. Now, the reason why I've done it this way is because I wanted to do some basic maneuvers, moving the objects around and building something. And what you'll notice is just how easy it was to create something quite nice and dynamic because of how good the lighting system is in Unreal Engine 5. And that's the next topic that I want to talk about, which is the basics of lighting. Now, once we've placed it in here, you'll notice that if we go inside, we have this very nice light casted about. I can also increase the size of this column so like it goes all the way up. Or what was nice about what it did before is that it added this shadow at the top. So I can actually even create another copy of it like that. And we have our pyramid here, which I can also try to scale up a little bit. Okay, now we have our directional light in the world. So I'm going to scroll the way up to select it. And over in here, you'll notice it has rotations. So the directional light is somewhere around there. Now, if I want to now rotate it, I can use these sort of like points in here, and you can see now it's pretty much creating this kind of dawn or dusk atmosphere. So I can actually take it all the way down or bring it a bit further up, or take it really high up in the sky and maybe even higher. Or sorry, maybe I can go on to the other side. So you'll notice that this is a 360 type of system. So if I take it all the way around, you can just move it up and down all the way until it comes back up again. And we can also, this axis here actually does nothing, so you can leave that to 0, but this one will sort of like shift the lighting around. So if we go into here and now start shifting the lighting, you'll notice just how nice and realistic everything is when you move it around. That's pretty neat. I can also bring it a bit lower, something like that, just to give us more definition within that little room that we created in there. Okay, now there's some other settings in the lighting system. So for example, we have the intensity. Now we could push this to 10 or even 50, which will make our entire scene very, very bright. and we also have a lot of light coming through. Now, if we take this back down to 10, you'll notice that the light dynamically changes. And this is all possible due to Lumen, which is a system that controls the light or provides us with very highly performant directional light, which is real time, right? Direct illumination. Also, before moving any further with the project, you always want to make sure that you've saved your progress. So if you press Ctrl S, this will open up a new panel if you haven't had a level created, and it will ask you to save it as a level. So we're going to call this tutorial level, and then I'm going to press save, which will then save our map. So now every time you do anything, it will actually be in here where it's called tutorial level. So now we can actually close the project, then reopen it, then reopen the level, and you want to make sure that after you made a few changes, you do save very frequently, otherwise you will lose your work in case the engine crashes. Remember, this is a game engine and it can crash quite unexpectedly for whatever reason at any given point. So just be mindful of that. So the last bit that I want to show you now with this level is how we can actually start interacting with it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our content drawer, and I'm going to press the add button over here. And where it says add feature content pack, I'm going to click that button, and over here I can select third person, and I'm going to say add to project. Now this might freeze a little bit until it's sort of like doing the work that it needs to do, but once it finishes, it should open the content browser, and it will show you that we have a BP third person character now that can actually be dropped into the level. So if we just drop this into the level like that, you'll notice that we have a pawn now that can be played with, but it's not going to do anything. You can't just press the play button and it will work. If you press the play button, it will just put you here, and that's about it, right? So let's just press F and go back to that. I'm going to delete the pawn. I'm going to go into my world settings, and over here where it says game mode override, I'm going to select the BP third person, which now shows up because we added it into our project. Now this automatically loads up all the default stuff that we need. And also, if you go over here, this was the button that allows you to play the level. If you go over here, you will have this option where you can click it, and it has default player start. You can change this to current camera location, which means that now you will start from where your camera is, which is where we're at right now in the scene. If I press the play button, I am now using that pawn that I just showed you earlier, and I am moving into the world from the current camera position. And I can actually go in through here, and I can go to the pyramid, and you can see my character is actually colliding with the pyramid and all these shapes. That's quite nice. Now you can press F1, sorry, not F1, you can press Shift F1 to get the mouse to show up, which this allows you now to, like, for example, pause this simulation or play it again. So now we can just move it again. But you can also stop it. You can stop it by pressing escape or pressing this red button over here. Now, other things to take note as well is that this camera is not necessarily it's the default, the perspective one, but you can also click over here and change it to a top view, bottom, left, right, front, and back, and they all have shortcuts. But perspective, which is the most important one, always has Alt G. So let's say we go into the top view. Now you can see we're actually seeing just a wireframe of top view, and you can see over here it says wireframe. You can change this to lit, which will now show the world as seen from above, which is quite odd to see. So if we scroll out, this is our little box over here that we created. This is our little, our little box that we created earlier. Our house. But we can press Alt G and we're back into our perspective view as we were before. There's also things like the scalability, which is to do with the settings of the engine. So if you actually click this button, you can select what level of detail you want to see. So you can switch this to low, which is like the biggest performance and the lowest amount of quality of the engine. You can also change these settings from up here. If you go to settings and then engine scalability, you can then change to cinematic again, for example. Now, also very important is that the option here where it says lit, you can also change this to unlit, which means that the scene is no longer going to have any directional light, and you can only see the object in an unlit mode. We're going to go back to lit, And I'm also going to go over here, these lines, and I've got this option to say show FPS. So this is going to show you just how expensive the current scene is and what you're doing in it. So right now, this scene is running at 60 FPS or more, which is great for playability. So that means that the scene is very light and nothing really needs to be changed about it. We have got maximum performance on this scene. Now that you have a firm grip of Unreal Engine, it's time to go to the next level. We're going to build up something more complicated in the next video. In the next part of the tutorial, you'll learn how to bring an environment to life. We'll be putting mountains together. We're going to put some, a landscape together. We're going to sculpt the landscape, add the material, and play around with some meshes from various different avenues like Unreal Engine Marketplace, Megascans, and so on to build a nice looking scene. I will also be providing a free project for you to use that you can get from my website. The link's in the description below, but it will also be used in the next project so you can just have an idea of what's going on. And yeah, without any delays, let's just move on to part 2 of the tutorial, and I hope you enjoy. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy this content. And feel free to have a look on my Patreon, as people on Patreon get access to all of my projects for the price of a coffee, effectively.